All right. Well, hello, folks. Welcome to the Hacker House Chat, aka Boba Talk Live, where we are inviting industry expert friends to the Codédex town square and just have a little fireside chat and dig into their coding journey a little bit. Hopefully, demystify the tech industry for you all. Today, we have a special guest with us. You might recognize her voice from the Codédex Summer Hackathon if you did the data science track, and is none other than our good friend, ex-coworker, and neighbor, Kat Zhou. So welcome, Kat.
Hello, everyone.
Cool.
Thanks for joining.
And for folks that didn't know, Kat was the head of data at Twitter and more recently at BeReal. Has a very interesting and colorful career trajectory. Kat is a Brooklyn native. We worked together for a few years prior at Codecami, and we actually live in the same neighborhoods for a while. So gotten pretty close over the years. She's one of the most well-traveled people I know. And fun fact, we're fostering a kitten right now from Kat named Cloud. For folks listening at home, this is actually a live event. We got 22 people here with us in the Hacker House. So thank you all for being here. All right, let's get started. So Kat, I know a lot has happened since we worked together since COVID. You were the head of data at the two companies I mentioned. And last I checked, I think 250 million people use Twitter daily and 25 million people use BeReal daily, which is absolutely mind-boggling. What's it been like working at these two companies?
Yeah, so I've been working in data for over 10 years now. And I think being able to work with data at the scale with this big of a user base has been very interesting. So you just run into a host of problems with scaling the platform, with kind of the real world aspect of social media and the impact it can have on the news and kind of exogenous events there. So I think just working at the intersection of all of that in social media has been really great, but has also come with a lot of challenges. But I feel really fortunate for having been able to work in a number of industries and different companies.
Yeah, and for folks that don't know, Kat, you actually worked at a bunch of almost like stepping stone jobs before like Twitter, right? Like I think you worked at JetBlue. By the way, you were a bike mechanic first, and then JetBlue, Codecami, and then Twitter. So maybe what we can do is let's take a step back. We got a lot of code newbies in here. In your words, what is data science, and how would you explain it to like a fifth grader?
Yeah, as far as data, so I've worked in the field of data kind of for, like I said, over 10 years now. So I think there's been a lot of changes, obviously, in the decade plus. And I think when I first started working in data science wasn't even a term. So my first introduction actually to analytics and data and even like social media was actually back in 2008. So I got very lucky. I saw just like a poster on a wall, or I think maybe it was a Craigslist ad for an internship. Yeah, actually, I don't think I told you this, Sunny, but it was a Craigslist ad. So Craigslist ad in 2008 for a paid internship in New York City where I grew up. And it was at a social media consulting firm. And this was at a time in 2008, very different from today. Social media was very new, and social media was seen as a thing for young people. So when they hired me, they thought, we just need to hire someone as young as possible because they will be our entryway or entry point. And I worked with some pretty large companies and government agencies. So I worked with 511 New York. I worked on a project for Whole Foods, I think at some point, for the Whitney Museum. And a lot of what they were doing was trying to figure out how does social media fit into a company strategy. And I actually got introduced to working with Google Analytics and a lot of web analytics platform when they were still in beta stage. So that was kind of how I got into it years ago. It really was this Craigslist ad. I think it was like $10 an hour. And I was like, I'm rich. This is great. I'd never hit double digits hourly pay before. And I fell into it. I found it really interesting. I decided, I was really good at statistics, or found it really interesting, and just decided to dive more into statistics and specifically kind of like web analytics and trying to understand that. So that was the origin of it. I think your original question is, what is data science? I guess my answer is also that it's changed a lot since I started, and I think it's still changing a lot. I think data science in particular is the intersection of like statistics, programming, and kind of subject matter expertise about whatever you're looking into or studying. And I think the ratios of each of those domains can kind of change a bit, but roughly it's kind of the intersection of those three things.
Mm, very nice. By the way, I didn't know that part about the Chrysler at all. That's pretty wild. So maybe while we're at it, maybe before we circle back to data science, maybe just like go a little deeper into your origin story. What did you study in college again, Kat?
Yeah, so in college, I went to a STEM high school. And when I went to college, I actually was like, I don't want to do STEM. Instead, I'm going to do like a social science degree, which I did, but I ended up still really liking statistics. So I ended up doing like computational social science. And I also did some research with like a Columbia professor while I was in college that I found really interesting, which was kind of trying to understand like, can we set up a experiment and kind of statistically understand if there's a difference between two groups? And simultaneously, I was also kind of studying concepts at college and trying to understand all of that. But I think looking back, it's easy to, in hindsight, kind of like pick on these things and be like, oh yeah, everything I did then was building up to today. But I will say with a lot of empathy to probably a lot of people in this room, I don't think I always knew what I wanted to do. I think it was really more like I slowly ruled out the things that I didn't want to do and the things that I was bad at. And I think I got really lucky and I kind of like fell into this career that I really like and that I've gotten really good at. But I think it was not always super clear to me what I wanted to do. And I think even the role that I have today did not exist 10 years ago, right? So I think that's kind of a way of just empathizing with all of you. If you're not completely positive what you want to do, I think that's okay. I think for a lot of people, the best way is to try out different things, see what you like, and lean into the things that you're good at. And hopefully things fall into place from there.
Yeah. And it's so true. I think data science is such a, I will say still is kind of relatively new field just in the last 5 to 10 years. Even when I started working, I think it was like data mining and data analysts. And now it's more just like data scientists and data engineers. But for folks who are kind of in the same boat with you, like maybe the 10 years previous version of you, who are sort of like dabbling into the data field, there's so many job titles now, right? And it's something I've been wondering, just want to hear from you. What do you think is the actual difference between the data analyst versus data scientist, or even these two versus a data engineer?
Yeah, I mean, I think job titles can be very confusing for people. And I think it's also because different companies can apply it slightly differently. That said, I think there are some general trends that you can see. I would say generally, you are starting to see more specializing between, especially at larger companies, they'll have all three. So let's focus on that. At larger companies that have data analyst as a title, data scientist, and data engineer, usually this is a larger team that's working together. And at Twitter, for example, I think by the time I left, I was managing an org of 20, 30 people that had a mix of people who were data scientists, data engineers, and data analysts. The process looked kind of like data engineers would structure the data and get it in shape so that someone who's a data scientist can work with that data efficiently. And the handoff process kind of looks a little bit like a software engineer generating data that gets stored somewhere in a data lake or in some sort of raw format. The data engineer extracts that data and gets it into a data warehouse or somewhere that can be used. And they're trying to structure it into a format that really makes it more usable for a data analyst or a data scientist. As far as the difference between a data analyst and data scientist, again, that can change. Like even you'd be surprised, even companies like Google did not have the title data scientist until really like 5 to 7 years ago. They were still using data scientists for even people with PhDs. So that's a recent conversion as well. I would say generally for companies recently, when they're trying to create that divergence between data analysts and data scientists, it can mean different things, but generally maybe a data scientist is working with larger data sets and needs to do a little bit heavier data engineering or kind of a deeper understanding of statistics versus a data analyst is maybe working closer to the subject matter expert. So maybe they're that liaison between the data team and a finance team, or the data team and the marketing team, and the data team and the product team, or something like that. But that said, I think like these delineations are not always very neat and they're always still changing a bit. But generally, I would say current state, larger companies, that's roughly what it looks like.
Okay. And what about like for you, like as a data scientist, what is your day-to-day actually look like?
Yeah, so I think it can really vary. I think one of the things that can be surprising for a lot of people is even as a data scientist, you're still doing a lot of data cleaning. And a statistic you'll see commonly used is 80% of data science is just cleaning the data. So a lot of work needs to be done before you can even get to the tip of the iceberg with either experimentation or model building or kind of like these things that maybe seem like sexier or more exciting in data science. There's a lot of foundational work that needs to be done before you can get to that point. And I think as far as day to day, there's a mix and it can really vary and kind of go in cycles. But I think there is a lot of working with stakeholders to understand what the business needs are and trying to understand what work needs to be done. There's a lot of back and forth sometimes with the engineering team on data quality issues, or let's say a new feature is being launched. We work really closely with the engineering team to build in analytics and kind of like scribing to make sure that data is generated for every new feature and we can kind of track that new feature. And then there's things like, depending on the company you're at, you might be doing things like analyzing experiments and A/B tests, doing a deeper analysis, building a prototype model. So I think it can really vary. I would say with data science in particular, there's a lot of context switching day to day, which for a lot of people you can really love. I think for me, I really like the variety and kind of being able to work on a variety of things. But I've also worked with people who started off as a data scientist and switched into becoming a data engineer or a different role that maybe do a little bit less context switching or switch into a role where they're a different type of data scientist. So I think it can vary a lot, but I would say, yeah, it can definitely vary a lot. But I would say the big thing that was surprising to me and to most people is there's a lot of foundational work and kind of fundamental knowledge that you need to have before you can even get to these deeper topics and work, if that makes sense.
And by the way, I think just even in our friend group, we've seen a lot of people who moved around within data science, right? Like from a developer into a data science, from data science to a PM, product manager. Yeah. And by the way, Kat, I totally feel you on the data cleaning part. I took a college, it was like a data science course. And I thought it's going to be a lot more, analysis, machine learning stuff, but it was like so much of it was just try to get the data in shape, like web scraping, data scrubbing manually, just to get data set to be like even usable.
Exactly. Yeah. And the reason why it's super important is another common saying in data is garbage in, garbage out. So like if the data that you're working with is low quality and has a lot of issues, missing data or things that are incorrect, then any model you build on top of that, any analysis you do is going to be garbage. So it's really important that you kind of understand that data end to end and really own that data quality process. So I think that's been the most surprising thing. And I will say, I think data quality is, we talked about the 3 different titles, like data analyst, data scientist, data engineer. A huge emphasis for every single one of those roles is data quality, because without that, the output of anything we do is not going to be useful or trustworthy.
Okay. And you touched a little bit on working at big companies. So you're one of the few people that I know that really did your stint at both startups and big tech. What are some differences working for a startup, a little startup, and a FANG company, I would say? And which one do you prefer?
Yeah. I mean, I get this question often of like, which do you prefer? I think I've worked at both at the appropriate times in my life. And I think I've learned something from each that makes it hard. I wouldn't give up one for the other. I think if you have the chance to do both in your life, you should try to do both. I guess that's my answer. I think as far as differences, so I think one of the key things at Twitter, for example, and one of the reasons why I wanted to join Twitter was really to be able to see data at scale. So when you have that much data and that many users, it just unlocks the potential for doing way more with your data. So for experiments or doing things like personalization, ranking, there's just a lot more you can do once you have that much data, historical data, and once you're like a global company. So I think that was one of the bigger differences of just being able to work at challenges at scale. That said, I think one of the things that was challenging for me when I moved from a startup to a big tech company is things did move a lot slower. Instead of being able to see the impact of my work really quickly, building anything was way slower and way more complicated at a large company like Twitter. So, compared to being able to build something in sometimes a day at a startup and seeing that live and out to users and kind of getting that instant gratification and feeling really excited. A lot of projects dragged on for like months, years at larger companies. So I think that's like the biggest difference. I think one of the things that is nice though, or one of the trade-offs is when you're at a startup, you get to build your skills as a generalist. And I think for me, that has been really key in making sure that I have a lot of different options in my career. And also keeps me intellectually stimulated.
Wait, a lot of what options?
A lot of different career options. So if you're at a startup and you're building different tools and skills, one of the things, if you only ever work at a big tech company, a lot of the tools that you work with are proprietary. So let's say even things like GitHub, for example, big tech companies don't use GitHub. They don't use Git. They might have their own internal version. They might not even, there's a lot of like on-prem stuff that they might do instead of like working in the cloud. There's like proprietary platforms for experimentation. They might work with a lot of things that just work within that one company. So that can make, let's say you go through a layoff, or let's say you get burnt out, or let's say you just get bored and you want a new job. The learning curve when you start job hunting and you're doing interviewing can be sometimes challenging because you're working with tools that are open source or that are external. I have seen this with a lot of candidates if they kind of struggle to adapt. I'm not saying it's not doable, but I have seen that transition of a big reason why people kind of go back and forth and try to build both experiences is you want to make sure that you're well-rounded as a candidate. And I think that's something that when you have both of those experiences, it can allow you to just have more flexibility in having different options. And it also, like I said, I think it keeps me at least feeling intellectually stimulated because I get to work on a lot of different things, different tools, and kind of see different ways of working. And I think something that I was missing when I was at a startup, for example, is I wanted to work with a much larger data team and I wanted to see things at scale. So being able to move to a big tech company allowed me to do that. I think I felt really lucky to be the head of data at Codecademy, but I also wanted to learn from people who were smarter than me and to learn from a bigger team of data leaders. And if I hadn't moved to Twitter, I don't think I would have grown as much in my leadership skills and people management skills. And I knew that in order to, if I wanted to ever go back to a startup, the experience that I built at a place like Twitter, I would be able to understand what a startup should try to grow to, if that makes sense.
Right. The North Star.
Exactly. So I feel really lucky, and that's something that I've tried to do of trying to work with companies at different levels of maturity. So you can kind of understand, okay, if I go back to an earlier stage startup, I kind of have a vision of what things could be. Right. And I can actually have that because I've seen it. I've seen what like excellence looks like or maturity looks like.
Yeah, there are a few things I want to touch on based on what you said. So one is scale at big companies. By the way, there's a new Netflix documentary that came out this week. It's really good. They touch on how, when you're working with such large data sets, right? 250 million users a day on Twitter, you get to do way more A/B tests, way more, to track whatever. And by the way, in product teams, they track retention, engagement, user progress, maybe even revenue. But for a startup like Codédex, because we're such a small team with limited bandwidth and resources, we've been kind of doing our data testing in almost like a sequential way rather than like a parallel way, meaning like every week we like, I think you all seen this, right? We do a weekly change log. We'll ship some new features, make some iterations, then we look at the data next week and we compare the data with the week prior. So we're not doing this in parallel, but that comes in with a lot of other factors that comes into play, like seasonality, different, maybe a spike in traffic due to some creator collab. But at big companies, you're doing countless combinations of tests, thousands of tests at every minute. So I think that's really the cool part where you get to, really use statistics analysis to get the right results like really quickly. I think the Buy Now documentary, the Amazon designer was talking about how they literally do thousands of these tests a day to see what's the perfect combination on a checkout page to get people to buy more, right? I mean, just like optimized to the extreme.
And I think just to touch on experimentation and A/B testing, I haven't seen that documentary, so I can't speak to that. But I think instead of so there's the optimization piece of the user experience. But I think something that I really liked is when I worked so I think before data really took off, let's say, or when I first started working in data like 10 plus years ago, data science was not a well-paid job. Like working in data for a consumer company did not pay well. It paid okay, but it's not like today. Like even in New York, I think entry-level salary was like 40K, 50K versus today you come out of college and equivalent offer would be like 90K, 100K or something would be like a good offer. I think one of the key things is in the past, data did not drive decision making, and a lot of decisions were made off of gut. I think one of the things that can be challenging there is it can lead to bias of oftentimes the most senior person in the room or the loudest person in the room, their opinion wins over. And that can be really challenging for teams versus I think when it made it easier to do things like A/B testing and experimentation and kind of data science formed as more of a partnership team and kind of like driving these business decisions, it removed a lot of that bias and it allows companies to kind of be smarter about what they ship, what they build, what changes they make. And I think that's a goal of like, obviously there's always some human input and opinion there, but I think the goal of data is to really just create some sort of North Star for teams that doesn't have that human bias. And I think at least for me, especially being like a woman in tech, I really appreciated that of working for companies that are data driven usually means that there's less inherent bias from the loudest voice in the room, if that makes sense.
Yeah. By the way, I do want to push back a little bit. I'm all for having voices in the room. That's 100%. I'm on board with that. But I do feel like over the last 5 years, everything is just optimized to the extreme. It's like almost like too data driven that what ends up happening is like all the landing pages start to look the same, right? All the checkout pages start to look the same. So it does lose a little bit of that artistic, the soul of like what a website or a web app look like. So I do feel like hopefully down the road we become a little bit more data informed rather than just like totally data driven, right? Just like numbers wins everything. So
yeah, I think I don't disagree with you there. So I think there is a balance that you have to strike, but I think I would say compared to the past. So this is a conversation for a different day, but the origin of like A/B testing to begin with comes from like mechanical engineering and like factories and building physical objects. So I think being able and clinical trials in medicine. So there is a need for just being able to test and understand and kind of being able to statistically back that, which even at, let's say, I think a good example actually is social media. So for example, with like ranking, I think making sure that you can actually measure and test your ranking algorithms to make sure that you're not over biasing misinformation, for example, is really important. And just going off gut, what someone believes or kind of like eyeballing it is not adequate, especially at a large social media company or even like a news algorithm. So
true.
I think there is a balance and I definitely agree with you there, but I think there's still a long way to go of having worked for companies for a while. I think the loudest voice, or I think a term that people use a lot is like HIPPO, so highest paid person's opinion.
True.
So this guy was the chief data scientist at Airbnb and Microsoft. He actually wrote a really good book for anyone who is interested in learning more about experimentation. There's a book called Trustworthy Online Experiments by Ronnie Kohavi. But I think being able to kind of, let's say not counter, I always try to say like our decisions should be data informed, not data driven, but we should aim to at least make sure that our decisions are data informed and not just based on HIPPO or the highest paid person's opinion.
Cool. All right. Well, I think there are a lot of people in this room who are getting started, right? There are a lot of people who are getting started learning Python, learning SQL with us. So let's dive into the more earlier career journey. First of all, there are so many tech tools now within data science since I studied it. Python, R, SQL, Excel, Tableau, Jupyter Notebooks. And you see more and more things, even in job descriptions. If you are starting over again, Kat, in 2024 or 2025, what are things that you will learn? What are libraries or tools or frameworks that you'll pick up now?
I think there's tools and I think there's also concepts. So I want to try to cover both. I would say for your original question, if we're talking about tools only, I think the lowest common denominator for a lot of data jobs is SQL. And you'll find this to be especially true if you're trying to career pivot. So I've seen a lot of people successfully pivot from a role where they're a business analyst or a financial analyst into a project manager or PM by learning SQL. So I think if you already have a job, the language that's easiest to learn and immediately apply tends to be SQL. And I think the concepts that is tied to is what we talked about with data cleaning, data querying, and kind of pulling and analyzing that data. And I think if you were to ask most data people what language they use the most in the day-to-day, it's actually more SQL than Python or R. That said, I do think if you have the time and the space and you're kind of learning within school, most schools don't teach SQL. And I think in that case, my answer varies a bit. So I think for Python, that can be really valuable as a general purpose programming language. So I think Python offers that flexibility of you can learn it and you can use it for different purposes. So not only is it valuable for getting into data, it might also be valuable if you're not sure yet and you might want to use Python and get into software engineering as well. R, I think, is very useful for learning statistics. So I think for certain fields, if you're trying to get into the pharmaceutical industry, for example, it can be more valuable, or for heavier statistics or economics. So a title that you might hear is like, I think Amazon, for example, has a massive economics department of applied economists. And that's where like a language like R has much heavier support and deeper support for like deeper statistical analysis than Python has. So that's a long-winded way of saying, like, I think if you're not sure what you want to do yet and you're looking for a general language that can serve your purpose, I would say Python. I think if you're pretty decided that you want a data and career if you want a career in data, and especially if you're trying to switch careers and you're already employed somewhere, I would actually probably choose SQL over Python. And if you're a PhD student, I actually encounter this often, who is going to specialize in economics or statistics or like some sort of computational area, then I would say R is probably a better choice just because it offers that deeper support for statistics.
Wow. Oh, I didn't expect you to say SQL first. Yeah, but I agree with the R.
I say that also because I know from the questions that a lot of people in this room already have careers and they're trying to career switch. So yeah, I think SQL, I've just seen a lot of people successfully pivot roles from within their company and land like a data scientist role or kind of do some sort of like apprenticeship within the data science role. And I've managed people like this too, who came from non-technical backgrounds, learned SQL, and they were able to career pivot. So
yeah, I think Sakuna or Samppii said like they like SQL. Yeah, SQL is super fun. Sometimes it is taught in colleges, but when they do teach it, it's always written. Like you're writing queries, you're not typing queries, right? So highly recommend picking SQL up. It does get pretty deep. Like, you know, I think I've seen your queries before, Kat, is like a page long for a single query, like multiple tables, joins, and stuff like that. But I think just to get the handle of SQL, it's actually really fun. I definitely enjoy it.
I forgot if I said that. Another reason why I say SQL is actually in even your largest tech companies, like Facebook, for example, the coding interview for data science job at Facebook is SQL only. So
SQL only?
That's why I say it's SQL only. So I mean, there's also a statistics component and like that, like understand, but I call it's the lowest common denominator when it comes to interviews. And I think SQL is something that can be really challenging. I also know for people like coming out of school, because I don't think it's taught super well in colleges, unfortunately. And it's very, very common in coding interviews for data science. I would say more common than Python and R.
Oh, wow.
I think Reddit is another company that does the interview only in SQL. I'm trying to think of what else, but even Netflix also. So your largest tech companies for their data science orgs, the coding interview is usually in SQL because it is the lowest common denominator.
Damn, didn't know that.
And it also demonstrates your ability to work with data at scale.
And by the way, Kat, what did Twitter use and what did BeReal use in terms of languages?
As far as language, every single company uses SQL. So like I said, that's the lowest common denominator. Okay. I have not worked for a single company that worked with data that did not use SQL versus I think with like R, Python, other languages and tools, it's been more variable.
Is there like a flavor of SQL that you like? Is it just like SQLite, Postgres? Like, is there a flavor that you seem?
I don't think it matters. I think it is easier. It's like easy to go between them once you learn. I think SQL is one of the languages that you can learn on the job. And I think I've seen many people successfully do it. But I think that's one of the things that I would say a lot of people commonly overlook of just when you're interviewing for a data job, knowing SQL is very important. Or at least knowing enough to pass the interview.
Cool.
I see someone ask, can you do SQL and LeetCode? Code? Yeah, I think there is. I think HackerRank is another resource. But yeah, ideally, I think the thing that will make you like a standout candidate is usually a lot of jobs require both SQL and either Python or R. But yeah, I will say I have currently observed that and as a hiring manager, I've seen this too, of SQL is kind of the gold standard right now for coding interviews and data.
So this actually leads us to our next question. So AI is a pretty hot topic. One of the things that I've been hearing, I think we even talked about this a couple of years ago, about one of the first things that we predict that AI will help automate is writing SQL queries, right? Automating some aggregate calculations. Where do you see the world of data science heading with the emergence of AI? Is this going to replace some of the SQL stuff, or you think it's not too problematic?
I think it has. Yeah, I think AI has the ability, it's already demonstrating the ability for people who can code to be more efficient. And I think this is true for Python, R, or SQL. So Copilot, for example, on Microsoft has gotten shockingly good. And I think the way to safeguard yourself against it is also to get good at it. So I don't think it needs to be scary, but I think I found it to be useful of just checking my syntax, kind of building templates. But I do think there is still a need to understand how to interpret it because there are still a lot of mistakes. And you also still need to plug in things like the tables you're pulling from. You need to be able to interpret the code itself. So I don't think it'll do away with humans completely, but I think the thing that is necessary is understanding how to work with it because I do think it makes your work more efficient.
Cool. Well,
I will say it demonstrates that you need to understand the underlying concepts more than anything. So perfect syntax becomes less important, and it's more like you need to at least understand the basics.
I definitely agree with that. Well, we also polled some questions from the community. So maybe I'll tackle some of them right now. So first one, we got one from Valérie, who's actually in the crowd right now. What's one piece of advice that you'll give to someone at the start of their journey into this field? So SQL aside, is there another piece of advice that you want to give somebody?
Yeah. Hello. Welcome. This is a great question. I mean, I think there are a lot of terms and a lot of information and a lot of things to learn. And I guess the one piece of advice I tried to give someone is try not to be overwhelmed, which is, I think, easier said than done. But I think there's a lot to learn, but there's also a lot of forgiveness. And I think there's an understanding with all employers that a lot of the learning and the best practice you'll do is learning on the job. So the one piece of advice that I'd give someone is not to over fixate on a specific job title or a specific company, but to try to get your foot in the door and try to get your hands dirty and get started. And whether that's through landing a job that's data adjacent and might not be the exact job title you want, or working at your current job, but still building your skills on the side on Codédex or other platforms. Make sure that you're getting your hands dirty because that's the best way that you'll learn. So I think that's the one piece of advice I'd give someone of just, even though you might not have that exact title that you want yet, there's probably still a lot that you can be learning in your current situation. And I think I would try to find those learning opportunities. And that's really the best way to get to where you want to be.
Totally. And I'll even go a step further is just maximize your learning. Don't even worry about your salary. Don't even about not just your job titles, right? If you can be in person with a team in the beginning of your career, that's game changing versus, remote. If you have a great manager or a few team members who are that you can learn from, I think those are the places you should probably look for. Cool.
Oh, I was just going to say, the other piece of advice I really like to give people is surround yourself with kind experts.
Experts.
Try to look for people who are smarter with you. Don't be afraid of working with people smarter than you. I love working with people who are smarter than me, but look for people who are genuinely kind and willing to work with you and who you feel like you can learn from. Don't work with someone could be really smart, but if they're arrogant and unwilling to work with you, that's a really tough environment to learn from. So I think there are a lot of kind experts out there. I've worked with a lot of them, and I think that's something that I try to be also as I've grown in my career. But I think when I try to look for teams that I feel like I'll grow from, or environments, or even, let's say, communities like Codédex, right? Going to conferences. For me, I felt like it's true. I don't know. I'm not just saying that, but I went to conferences a lot earlier in my career because I felt really lonely in my job at a large non-tech company. And I found a lot of kind experts who were in the roles that I wanted to be in. And I feel like I learned a lot through that.
All right, here's another one from Samppii, who's a community mod and also a current CS student from Cali. Samppii is on the left side on the beanie bag. What are some memorable project or initiative from your time at BeReal and Twitter that really highlighted the importance or the impact of data science?
Yeah, I would say I'll think back to like my time, let's say at Twitter. So I joined Twitter in 2020, and if you remember, 2020 was a mess for everyone. But yeah, in 2020,
wait, did you join Twitter right during COVID? Wait, is that COVID? Yeah.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah, so this is what I'm getting into. So I don't know if people remember this. So in 2020, Jack Dorsey was in front of Congress a lot. And that was exactly when I joined Twitter. And there are a lot of questions from US Congress about like COVID misinformation. And there was a lot of bad information on just out there coming from social media, coming from word of mouth about drinking dangerous chemicals, about COVID coming from 5G. Like it was just like crazy conspiracy theories and very dangerous information. And I think that really highlighted to me the importance of data science at a place like Twitter or any media company, of just the importance of not just downranking bad information from bad actors, but also how do you highlight and uprank and recommend good information for people and kind of get that in front of them at a time where people were just really trying to seek out an understanding of what was going on in the world. And I think that was memorable to me because that was literally like day one for me. I think it was really gratifying. I actually worked really closely with the policy team on defining what is misinformation. We worked with nonprofits and public health experts to try to understand how we define and kind of highlight good information and trying to get that within communities and kind of spreading that. But I think that will always sit with me just because that was day one, and that's a big, difficult problem because a lot of the information was evolving real time. But it really highlighted the impact and need for data, and I think that's something that I feel really lucky to have been able to work on.
That's awesome. All right, we got another question from Mel the Texas Hammer, CS student based in Texas. How can someone intersect data analysis and data science with web development? Is this something that you can add on?
I mean, I think there is a strong intersection. One of the things that I talked about earlier is, as a data scientist, I work really closely with software engineers because generally software engineers are the ones generating the data within the web application. And I've actually met some people who also, we've talked about career pivoters, and I think you, Sunny, also are a good example. I've also seen people kind of go on and decide like, I want to found my own company, or I want to build my own web app. And I've met founders and people who are web developers who, when they build a web app, they try to understand how to link it to a database and make sure that they're collecting at least some data. It doesn't need to be as sophisticated as Twitter, obviously, but just having that understanding, at least on some level of data analysis and data when you're building a web app, is just really valuable. I think it just helps you understand. And it's really helpful. I remember, Sunny, when you were building Codédex, just seeing the numbers roll in and being like, oh my God, we have like this many visitors, and seeing that chart go up is really exciting, and seeing what countries they come from and understanding your user base. I think there's definitely a lot of intersection there.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, Mel, I don't know if you remember the data science track at the summer hackathon. A lot of people turned their data visualizations into a web app, right? So that I feel like that's like a perfect way, is not only do you create the visualizations, you also build it, deploy it, host it, right, and put it on the internet for other people to see. I feel like that's the final step if you want your findings to be seen by the world. So I'll say that's definitely another route. Some other things I've been seeing lately, it's like, just classic chatbots, NLP. Sometimes people consider that as part of data science a little bit. Web scraping, that could also be used to find data online. So I guess that's kind of like web devy / data sciencey, like intersection.
Data products, I think, is also like, there are people who build a web app that is based on some sort of idea around data too. All
right, one more question from the community. By the way, after this, maybe we'll do a Q&A session so people can raise your hand and jump up. But we got one from Jessi. Jessi's in the room, right on the yellow beanbag. So, Kat, what is one one of the biggest challenges you faced when handling data? This could be around personal project or at work. What's like a really difficult challenge that you went through surrounding data?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I talked about this a lot, but I think the surprising thing for a lot of people is just data quality is like the bane of most, anyone who works in data will tell you this, of like,
Right.
we're just constantly running into data quality problems. And when that happens, it's really hard to get our jobs done. And I think it's a systems problem, but it's also a people problem, right? So I think that's one of the things that's challenging of, yeah, bad data, right? Like, I don't know, you could be trying to build some model, but then let's say you find out the data has been off for the last few months, then you need to wait another like few months to collect new data that's good. And then it can just like, I don't know, it feels like a house of cards sometimes. So I think that's the biggest challenge, data quality. There's some tools coming up that can help with like data monitoring and whatnot, but I don't think it's just a tooling problem. It's also a people problem. You need to work with a place where the people and the organization also care about data quality and they're not just trying to, get a quick response. So I think one of the other big challenges with data science is a trade-off. You're constantly making that trade-off between speed and rigor. And I think that's a very common topic that comes up for data people of like, if you want to be rigorous, it's really hard to be fast. But if you want to be fast, it's very hard to be rigorous and to go deep. And I think you're constantly trying to figure out the right ratio of like, okay, I have this question that arrived at my desk. What's the right ratio of speed versus rigor in order to get something? Because ideally, I think for most people who are really into data, ideally you would be as rigorous and thorough as possible. But the reality is you can't always do that. There's only so much time in the day. So yeah, I think those are the biggest challenges and this will come up with literally anyone who works in data and software engineering too, of that trade-off between speed and rigor and kind of diving deep and being really thorough and just getting something out.
Startups, big tech. I think that's the ultimate question for every company, every team to figure out, right? What is the right balance? Speed. You said speed versus rigor, right? Here at Codédex,
yeah,
we say like velocity versus precision, but yeah, same thing.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. All right. I actually realized we have another question from Ritu. Ritu is also in the crowd. Ritu asked, how can a non-technical person starting now without any schooling, education, right, CS degree, get a job in data in 2025? Like, can you just walk us through how you'll probably tackle this?
Yeah, I think there was a similar question earlier, but kind of similar of getting your foot in the door and not fixating on the title. So I mentioned, I think I said this in passing, but one of the things that I recommend is look for a role that might not have, maybe it doesn't even have data in the title, but it's data adjacent. So I think getting a job where you're working with data in some capacity, or maybe you're working side by side with a data analyst or data scientist, I think that's probably the best way of just, what are the jobs that are available to you or opportunities that are available to you? And can you get as close to being able to work on it hands-on and kind of seeing it in practice as you can, if that makes sense? And if that's not finding a job, I think even being in communities like this, for example, of just learning more about it, being close to people who've worked in it. But I think the more, I mentioned this earlier, the more you can get your hands dirty and can get exposure, hopefully you can find a job that gets you closer to working in data or working close to data, if that makes sense. But yeah, I'll also just empathize. I think the reason why I say I wouldn't focus or hyperfixate on titles is when I started working in data, I mentioned this earlier, when I started working in data over 10 years ago, it was not a high paying field. It wasn't like a hyped up job like it is today. It was kind of a boring, or it straight up was a boring back of office job.
Right.
It was
the counting
not a job that people, yeah, it wasn't a job that people aspire to. And I just found it interesting. I was like, I just liked it. And it was also the opportunity that came to me. I know there is way more competition today for data jobs than I faced all those years ago. So I think it's hard for me to give that advice because I think a lot of it, I recognize that like I was at the right place at the right time and I got into data when it was less competitive. But I think the takeaway for a lot of people can also be like, try to take the opportunities that are available to you. And maybe it's not like the most, hyped up job right now, but it could turn into it. Or it could just turn into a really fulfilling career because maybe you're just good at it. So yeah, I don't know if that's useful, but I also just say that with empathy because I think there is way more competition than there was when I started, and I totally recognize that.
Yeah, I guess I'll plus one to Kat. I think the tech adjacent jobs, I think that's a perfect way to do it. Whether it's like there are a lot of like new jobs that new type of openings now, like prompt engineering assistant, data mining associate. Like I feel like those are probably pretty good. Tap into your local community if there's any local smaller startups that require that with a lot of customers or users. I think those are great. And of course, hackathons, like these things are helpful to build your personal projects up. Cool. All right.
Oh, I just wanted to summarize. I don't think there's one clear path. There are many different paths you can still take. You can do data for a non-tech company. For many years, for the first third of my career, I worked in data for non-tech companies. I mean, tech companies didn't really exist, but I worked in data for like a gym. I worked in data for the government. I worked in data for an airline. And all of these were not tech companies, but I built technical skills. So I think that's also something to keep in mind. There are people who work in data who are not working for tech companies, and you're still building the same skills and the same concepts that you need to be successful.
100%. Cool. I know we're a little over time. Maybe we'll do one or two questions. If you still have a question, you want to raise your hand, just click on the headphones button. Oh, we got another one from Coder.
Before you got into the industry, what was like your routine to start up the day and like find what you did? Do you do like study, or did you just do projects, or did you have like a good meal or something like that, or meet other people as well?
Yeah, I think, let me see. So do you mean like after, like when I first started job hunting, maybe like before I got my first job or something?
Yeah, like that.
Yeah,
What's your secret,
I
Kat?
think, oh man, I will say I think it gets easier over time. So I think the first time I ever landed my first like full-time job, I think you actually asked me about the Sunny of like why I was like a bike mechanic back then. So economy was not so good in 2008, 2009, people remember. So I worked as a bike mechanic because I had student loans and I still needed to pay them off, and I was job hunting. So I worked a bunch of different jobs together at once while I was job hunting for a full-time job. And I think in that phase in my life, when I was looking for my first full-time job with like healthcare, I applied to like literally hundreds of jobs, and in the end got one offer working for a gym. And that was my first job with health insurance, which was really exciting.
I love how you said working for a gym.
It was doing data analysis for a gym. So it was my first
people
data
think
job.
back in the day it was so much easier. It wasn't, it was just as hard.
It goes in waves. I applied to hundreds of jobs and I got one job or one offer. And then the next time I did a job hunt was like a year later. I didn't stay very long at that job. And I knew I wanted to work for, or I wanted to work for an airline. I applied to an airline. I think I applied to like maybe, so first time I applied to jobs, I applied to hundreds of jobs, got one offer. Second time I applied to like maybe 50 jobs or 40 jobs. I got one offer. The third time I applied to jobs, I think I only applied to like 10 things and I got two offers. And then when I went to Twitter, I didn't even apply. They reached out to me.
Right.
And another large tech company reached out to me and I got offers to both. So, and this is over, again, it's in hindsight and it's not always linear, but it does get easier over time. And I think back to, you asked me about what my routine was back then. I applied to things. I tried not to get discouraged. There were times where it was really hard. I found a side hustle being a bike mechanic. And then I actually still work. When I got the full-time job, like office job at the gym, I was still working at the bike shop on the weekends just because I wanted extra money. That was not healthy. I was working like 6-7 days a week, but I paid off my loans faster. But yeah, I think finding a way to keep yourself occupied is really important, and taking breaks is really important, and not being discouraged. And I think remembering that it really does go in waves. Unfortunately, I do know the economy is not super easy right now for entry-level jobs. And that was also true when I first started, and then it got easier. So I think it moves in waves. I think take the opportunities that are available to you, find ways to keep busy, I became I started working as a bike mechanic because I also felt like getting my hands dirty and kind of like not being in front of the computer all the time and getting paid kept me sane. So I think I'm not saying you need to become a bike mechanic, but maybe you have some version of that of, maybe cooking or going on a walk or hobbies or, a side hustle, walking dogs. I don't know, just things that keep you sane. Because job hunting is really hard, but I promise it gets easier.
Yeah, it definitely gets easier. So believe in the process, lemon tag. By the way, the coder is lemon tag, right? And I think there's a quote. It's like, if you work with your brain, like play with your hands. Like you need to find something else outside the monitor where you can really relax and recharge, and find another sort of like a metric or something that you can chase after, just so you don't burn out while learning and leveling up.
Yeah.
And I think Ruth, you.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. Pro tip, unmute your computer too if you try to go for it. But thank you so much, Sunny, for putting this together, and Kat for joining. This was super helpful and inspiring for me. Like Sunny mentioned, we were able to chat last week, and that just, helped a lot. Like as we're talking about discouraged, like not getting discouraged on the journey, just having that conversation, like feeling like I'm not alone in the process is super helpful. So super grateful for that. But like you mentioned, I am currently a business analyst, have been post-grad for about a year, and, decided to make the transition over, data analytics, which just kind of came naturally to the work that I was doing. The world is just becoming increasingly technical. So I just was picking up tools and things along the way for the different projects that I was doing, and then fell into SQL this summer and loved it. And, now falling into Python. And so I guess my question, and is something that someone typed in the chat earlier, was surrounding like projects. As you know, like for entry-level analyst, having that balance between project experience and like your actual work experience is important, because we don't have a whole resume full of job experience surrounding data analytics. So just wanted to get your perspective on this question as well. I asked Sunny this last week and he had a good point of view. But from your perspective, do you think it's more important to have projects focused towards the industry you're interested in going in, or more newspaper or Wall Street Journal focused projects, things surrounding healthcare or the transportation industry? Or do you think, like, would you hire a data analyst whose project were surrounded by things like they enjoyed or their hobbies, like traveling, or, I see a lot of people do like recommendation engines. So from your perspective, like for people who are in between that kind of post-grad period, but aren't necessarily experienced hires yet, like 1 to 3 years of experience, what do you look for when you see those projects from someone in between that range?
Yeah, I think I think one thing to consider is that I think projects are not just for potential employers. I think they're for you. And I think projects are a way for you to get your hands dirty, to build confidence, and also to stay excited. So I think I wouldn't try to cater what type of projects you build based on what you think a potential employer wants to see. I would pick it based on what motivates you and what do you find more exciting. Because most likely, if you're diving into a project that excites you, you'll do a better job. You'll find it more interesting. And most importantly, it'll keep you motivated to learn. And I think that's what I would focus on. Of like, you listed a bunch of different projects, and I don't think there's like an ideal project that an employer is looking for. And I think largely a lot of projects are actually just for you to build those skills. And I think another thing that you didn't mention is also, I will say, I think one thing that employers will look for is not just like a link to your portfolio, but also, you mentioned you're already a business analyst in your current role. I imagine you're already doing like analysis of like data, or analysis of like of things maybe in Excel or like a dashboard tool or something. I think something I would think about is also, what are relevant projects that you can find at your current job that you can put on your resume? I think to an employer, that's also very appealing if you can talk about, I'm already in an analytics role doing business analytics. I was able to save the company this much money or this much time by automating this dashboard, or by discovering this insight that saved us this much money or something. And I think that ends up being very clearly like evidence, I guess, from an employer or a potential company that you are capable of working in data analytics. And I think you're a perfect example of someone who already is working in the field, even if you might not feel that way.
Thank you so much. That's super helpful. Yeah, I think I thought about that, like using, work with SQL, or just using projects that I had already completed. I was just hyper worried about client sensitivity and, I ChatGPT'd it once and it was like, oh, people can figure out kind of the data structure of the clients you're working with based off of the code that you're doing. So that kind of shied me away from listing those projects on there. But I think there's a way for me to sanitize it so that it's, just like base level what I did and what some of the code, like maybe I don't put all of the code on GitHub, but just like a little, like a piece of it without like distinct column names and things like that. So that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for work stuff, definitely don't put proprietary work stuff on GitHub. But I think it's more of a way of like build those skills at work and then you can put the summary of what you did as a bullet point on your resume. That's what I mean. But I think for like side projects that you're doing on your own, I think that should be actually not on like work data. I think that can be on any data that you find most interesting, like things that you post on GitHub, I mean. So that was kind of like a 2-part answer to your question.
Very nice. And by the way, Ruth, I think there's one more thing I didn't share last time in our one-on-one is like, as a hiring manager, when you're hiring more senior people, you're usually looking for upper bound, right? Like, can this person just like tackle a wide range of things? You're testing for the upper bound. For an entry-level position, if you try to break into data analyst, I will try to focus on the breadth and the depth of your projects. So people usually recommend 3 projects, right? 3 projects on your resume. What is like the perfect trio project that really shows the breadth and depth of your knowledge? If you do that, I think that will check off a lot of boxes for hiring managers. Like can they just come in and be able to learn the framework that they use and pick the skill up, right? By showing the breadth and depth, I think, and the authenticity of your within the project, I think that'll be really helpful. Cool. And by the way, Kat, you said something that I think a lot of people didn't know here. We briefly touched on this a while back, which is like Facebook and, like a company like Facebook don't use GitHub, right? They have their own version control system. They don't use Slack. They have their own Slack, right? I think that's something that a lot of people don't know about. So yeah, I didn't know that until like literally 2 years ago. But
I think all of that is to say like I would worry less about specific tools and more about like understanding concepts instead of your goal isn't just to learn Git, your goal is to understand what version control is.
Exactly. Well, thank you all for spending this Thursday with us. Thank you, Kat, for being here. I learned a lot, and hopefully the people in this room also did too. If you like today's session, definitely let us know. If there's any way to make this even better, you know where to find me. So yeah, thank you, Kat, once again for being here with us, and until next time.